Hello, my name is Pastor Gary Nelson, and thank you for joining me today on Time Tested Truth, truth that has stood the test of time. It is my desire every time we meet together to bring you encouragement, to strengthen your faith, and to deepen your love for the Lord. Thanks for joining us. As we study these incredible names of Jesus, we learn that he meets every need we could ever possibly have. He covers all of our lives with his power and his truth. There's nothing we will ever face that he cannot handle. There's nothing we could ever need that he does not provide. He is our all in all, our everything. So let's dive in. First of all, we need to go back to one of the most important and incredible events in Jewish history. Moses had fled from Egypt to save his life. You remember he had killed an Egyptian for killing a Jew, and he became a fugitive. And he was a sheepherder in the land of Midian for 40 years. Can you imagine spending 40 years with no conversation more significant than the bleating of sheep? Now, I don't know about you, but that puts being a shepherd at the bottom of my career goals. But one day Moses saw a bush on fire. Not a brush fire, just one bush. And he notices that the bush is not consumed. Have you ever seen a brush fire? Sometimes you see them alongside the freeway. They're usually due to spontaneous combustion. But you also see them in other places. They are fast and they are hot. But all of them have one characteristic. They consume everything. A field of brush that catches fire ends up just blackened soil. Moses draws near to investigate. Wouldn't you? All of us would. And then it happens. He hears God's voice speak to him. Take off your sandals. Gaither's song had it right. The place where you are standing becomes holy ground when you are in God's presence. And then God begins to give Moses his assignment. You are going to return to Egypt to deliver his people from slavery. Moses argues, debates, negotiates, bargains with God. You choose the word. It all comes down to this. Who shall I say sent me? In other words, what's the authority for me to do this? Why should they listen to me? God's answer is his name. Tell them I am sent you. The name is 4 consonants, YHWH. We really don't know how to pronounce it, but the best guess is Yahweh or Yahweh. The Jews never spoke this name for fear of violating the 3rd commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. To break this commandment meant being executed by stoning. If this was followed today, we would not have freeways or roads or even hiking paths we could use because of the stone piles blocking our way. When the Jews came to this sacred name, they simply inserted the name Elohim. Now this name is used 2,500 times in the Old Testament, and it means mighty one. If you want to know how the name Jehovah came to be, message me. It's fascinating. So when Jesus calls himself I am 7 times, there's no mistaking that he is calling himself the divine name of Exodus 3:14 and 15. So don't try to patronize Jesus as a good teacher, a good man. No, he cannot be anything but what he said he was. I am. Now the first of these I am names is I am the bread of life. John chapter 6, verse 35. It's in the context of the famous passage of feeding the 5,000. For all of you Bible students, it's the only miracle reported in all 4 Gospels. Following that miracle, many followed him. But Jesus was not fooled by their feigned allegiance. He called them out by saying they were just following him for the bread of life he supplied. For the bread he supplied. Then he explained to them that God supplied the manna, the bread from heaven. Listen to what he said to them. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Bread in that day was a staple of their diet. That is still true for most of the world today. We even have phrases in our vocabulary that use bread to describe a meal. Have you ever heard the phrase, come over to my house tonight and we will break bread together? Of course you have. And that makes Jesus' statement even more important. When my children were young, my wife bought me one of those bread making machines. It was really cool, and I really got into it. I used it against my family, though. It had a timer, and I set it to start baking about 15 minutes before their alarms were to go off. And I put it in the same room as the forced air furnace. That way, when the bread was baking and giving off those tantalizing aromas, the furnace would draw them in and distribute them throughout the house. Who can resist the aroma of fresh baked bread? What is he saying in this statement? Well, if you have nothing else to do with your time, you can research the internet and find there are basically 17 different kinds of bread, according to one source. But bread is not talking about bread. It's not about varieties of bread. He's talking about himself. That's why he says bread of life. He has not come to give us bread. He is the bread. That gives life and not the bread that gives life and not just breathing, but eternal life. Now, you can believe what you want to, but I'm convinced the eternal life is the number one issue of life. As I look back at my life, I see just how fast it passes. My children now are all grown and married with children of their own. And I'm just old. When I was 25, I thought the age I am today was ancient. And that makes eternity ever so close. About 25 years ago, my brother-in-law was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I immediately began planning to fly to Boise to see him. I knew that form of cancer was very aggressive, and he didn't have much time. But 11 days after his diagnosis, he was gone. I never got to see him, to say the final goodbye. I felt like I had been kicked in the gut. We must all face that moment someday. And none of us knows when that day is for us. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that life is fragile, and we need to consider where we stand with eternity. They asked Jesus the right question. Where do we get this eternal bread? And his answer is still the one we need to hear today. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. This has got to be eternal life. We cannot survive physical life without food and water. We can get along without houses and cars and stuff. That's the things we have piled in our garage. We can even get along without clothing, but don't try this at home. But we cannot get along without bread and water. Simply put, we can never be satisfied without a relationship with Jesus. Have you ever finished a big meal like Thanksgiving and felt so full it was uncomfortable, and you said to yourself, I will not eat again for a week? But the next day, you had leftovers. So this is truth number one. You must have a relationship with Jesus. This is foundational truth. Ground zero. You miss this, you miss everything. Do you remember Amelia Earhart? She was trying to fly around the world. She left Africa, but her radio communication and her compass both failed. She had nothing to guide her. Unfortunately, she was flying over the Pacific Ocean, which is the largest ocean on our globe. She flew until her fuel was exhausted and she crashed somewhere in the ocean. In the Pacific, if you miss your landing place, you miss everything. And in life, if you miss Jesus, you miss everything. Life, full, complete, and eternity with him. One day, Jesus asked his disciples a question. Who do you say that I am? How would you answer that? Be honest. Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? Think deeply. The answer you give decides your eternal destiny. Well, that concludes our study for today. It has been my joy to spend this time with you. But may I ask you a favor? Would you please tap the like button just so that I can know you're listening? That would mean so much to me. And also, would you please hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode, a single study?